Christian Church. It's good to see everyone on this beautiful Memorial Day weekend. So it's glad you chose to join us today. Several announcements here today, so bear with me. The Divinity Women's Group will meet this Thursday, June 2nd at 12:30. Bring a sack lunch and meet in the Blue Room, and all ladies are invited to join in this. Jerry Eagle had several announcements that he wanted to make about the car show for June 11th. Number one is he still needs help. So if you can help in any way, there's a sign-up sheet in the narthex. Number two, please tell your friends and family about the raffles. There are $1,800 in gift cards and products in 3 raffle baskets that we have. And Linda will actually be selling tickets in the narthex today. And then Jerry will also be here on Thursday evening, June 9th, from 4 to 7. So any family and friends that you have that would be interested in buying tickets that won't be able to come to the car show, Jerry will be here that Thursday evening for 3 hours, and he will be selling tickets on June 9th from 4 to 7. And then the last one is come out and enjoy the car show. It's going to be a lot of fun, and if you're able, it'll be a big event for the church. And then I have one other announcement. We received a message from Susan Westfall, who is Ned Renault's daughter. And on June 11th, which is the same day as our car show, unfortunately, they're going to have a memorial service for Ned at the Grafton Christian Church. So if anyone is interested in that, it's going to be at 11 o'clock, and family it will be greeted at 10:15. So if any of you are interested in doing that, I believe that's all I have.
Let us bring ourselves into the presence of God, who is always present for us. We begin today by reading Psalm 97, and this is an interpretation by Leslie Brandt. I can't even see the sun this morning. The coastland fog has blotted out heaven's light, making the early hours cold and damp. But God is here, in me and around me, and I will rejoice in him. I hear no angel choirs, no church bells summon me to worship. Only the thunder of four-wheel vehicles and the acrid odor of exhaust greet me as men and women rush to their unnumbered shrines and pursue their avaricious goals. But God is here, and I will rejoice in him. I cannot see the mountains or smell the flowers or even hear the songs of birds. I cannot love the people who bustle around me. I see unhappiness and injustice and depravity. I hear the ear-grating sounds of pain and complaint. I feel the stifling pressures that suck me into the stream that rushes by my door. But God is here, in me and around me, and I will rejoice in him. Let us stand. Our great God does care for his creatures. He secures forever those who are his. He is here, in us and around us. Let us all rejoice in him. come before you this morning, O God, of surprise and wonder, to place ourselves in your hands. Remind us that we stand on holy ground and ask you to mold and form us for your service. Now quiet our minds and our hearts that we might praise you with all of our being. Amen. You may be seated.
Our scripture lesson this morning is from Acts chapter 15, verses 36 through 41. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they were doing." Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So ends the reading.
stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender. All I am is yours, and I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender. All I am is yours. So what can I say? And what can I do? But offer this heart, oh God, completely to you.
Churches, believe it or not, are not immune to conflict. We expect more of churches, but I see most in this room, if not, probably can guarantee all of us have been in church forever. And if you've been in church, you know there is church conflict. Sadly, it often kills churches. But most of all, it gives a bad name for Christianity. People see what we do, and it reflects on us. Usually both sides have good and bad opinions. Both sides are probably valid, as it goes in all arguments. And many of you, I know many of you, have experienced that pain. You lose that sense of place. That place where things happened in your life, and that fellowship that was in that place. It's a personal kind of thing. Church is like a family. It's more than an organization. And so we feel all of that emotionally. And it's painful, very painful. I know of one church, many of these I attended and many I worked in. But I know one, this happened before I was part of the church, but the building burned. It was a downtown church, beautiful old building, I was told, but it was downtown, and there was no parking. They had to park on the street or borrow other parking lots in order to go to church. So when the church building burned down, and I knew people on both sides and loved them dearly, one group wanted to stay downtown. You could walk to church. That was the spot where things happened in their lives. They wanted to keep that place. And then the other church wanted to move out where there was more parking and buy a building that was already built there. And they wanted to have that place so more people could come and join them. Valid on both sides. But sadly, it split. And it was a small town, so it also upset town. So I got to thinking about churches and splits, and so I decided that I would Google the worst church split. I thought this might be kind of fun. Well, then I got to thinking, well, worst, does that mean hurt the most people? Does it mean the most people lost the greatest amount of attendance? Or maybe the stupidest reason for a split? Well, I chose the stupidest reason, I felt like it was. It was over fried chicken. Have no idea where, but it said two ladies were kind of feuding with each other. They just didn't get along. And so they had a church dinner, and all the food was laid out. Everybody brought their dish. And so the preacher went up, and he grabbed the piece of chicken and took a taste and said, "This is the best chicken I've ever tasted." Well, apparently these two feuding ladies each brought fried chicken. So the one whose chicken did not get tasted, she and her family left the church. I say that because there's more to that story than just fried chicken, right? They were having troubles. There was an underlying issue. The fried chicken was not the problem. The problem was the discord going on within them and apparently their families. And that's not so far-fetched. We can think about that in our lives and those places that we've been in organizations with others. Another church I was part of decided to remodel the sanctuary. And so the decorating committee decided they wanted to paint some of the woodwork, make it a little brighter inside the building. And they chose some very nice soft colors, but one of them, I believe, was kind of a mauve color. Well, that became a huge fight in the church about the colors chosen and the idea of painting some of the woodwork. Well, was that the real problem? I don't think so. You see, the head of the decorating committee was also very active with the youth director and the youth group. And the folks who were upset about painting the wood were the older people. And there was an argument over staff pay. The senior adult minister pay versus the youth minister pay. And that had been going on and on and on. So then when the church decorating came about, it became a huge explosion, way over just a discussion over color. Well, Christianity Today is a good magazine that had a little story, and it was called The Anatomy of a Church Split. And it was written by a pastor of a church that split. And it was written from his point of view. But he said that there were warning signs. And the challenge for churches is to recognize these signs early and to act on them. And to act on them with godly wisdom. And I think there are things that we can be aware of in ways in which we interact with one another so that we don't get to that point. Well, in this church, and I promise you this will not happen here, but in this church they had the retiring pastor going out and they had the new pastor coming in. Well, they gave the title Pastor Emeritus to the retiring pastor. He had a congregational vote. He was still within the church. His family was still going. Retired, but the family was all there. He was in the retired status. But they hadn't let go of their power. And it was kind of an affront to their status somehow when the new pastor came in and began to urge the congregation to make some changes, to go in a little different direction. And so the retired pastor's family began to pull people into their corner. We triangulate. If we have a problem, this person has a problem with this person, we always want to bring a third one in, and then we just kind of grab more and more and more so we get our group on our side, and you begin to see that divide. And of course, the pastor would say, well, I just want what's best for the church. I'm not trying to interfere. I just want what's best in the church. But then his wife, during the sermon, would very visibly look down or do things rather than watching the new pastor preach the sermon. A little passive aggressiveness there. But you see, they were exalted. They'd been there for a long time. Everybody loved them legitimately. And so nobody went to them and said, hey, this isn't right. We can't do this. And so the problem became huge, divided the church, and the young pastor eventually left. The underlying issue there was the power, the old guard versus the new guard. And so this pastor said there's 4 lessons that come out of that. And this is good for all churches. We need to honestly look at the dynamics within a church and realize we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us. Realize we're all different. We each have our own skills. We have our own points of view. We are differently abled. And we, all of us, come into church with all of that including our emotions and our spirituality. And that makes it a little more volatile because it's so personal. It's family in this room. On top of that, we come with our different economical aspects to it, political, social, all of that. You see how many dimensions come into us as a body in this room. And so the most important thing is to resolve to love. When we disagree, resolve to love. Second thing he said was ensure that the church leadership is on the same page, that there is a vision, which we did do a mission statement a couple of years ago. We might need to look at that again, make sure our vision is what we think God is calling us to do. Make sure the direction is clear, that our policies are in effect and that we're adhering to them. Foster unity within the church in communication, which is number 3. Communicate immediately when problems brew. Bring the parking lot discussion into the room. We don't want that triangulating, that pulling into our side, bringing it out into the parking lot or wherever. And then, of course, the last is to seek God's wisdom. You see, that retiring pastor needed to hand it over, needed it to lift the church up to God while handing the responsibility to the congregation and to the new leadership. Because you see, we're all replaceable. I bring this up because I'm about to leave. If I can keep preaching for the next few weeks without crying, try here, but excuse me if I do cry. But I'm replaceable. And honestly, I want you to think about the things that you like about me. That's what I would love for you to go home and talk about and stay there. But honestly, there's things you don't like about me. There's things we don't like about everybody. And so somebody else is going to come into this room and going to take over. And remember, there are things you're going to like about that person. There's some things you're not going to like too. But we have to resolve to love and embrace and bring in. And I promise to you, I will step back because I want what's best for this place. I want to embrace the new. I am going to let go of the old. And I'll need you to do that too. And embrace the new. And be joyous for the wonderful things we did. And I hope a lot of those continue to go. But embrace the new and look forward to the future. Well, this is in our scripture today. If I had you read, John read, the very end. This is hard to do, this mic and glasses. I had John read the end of the chapter, which is kind of a strange passage. But we're going to go back to the beginning, because there was some underlying issues, I think. If we go back to the beginning of chapter 15, and by the way, in seminary and in theological circles, we always talk about chapter 15 as being the Jerusalem conflict. But I think a lot of our Bibles say the council at Jerusalem. But really, it was a big old fight. It was the early church trying to figure out how to be church. And so if we go back to verse 1, it says, then, and Paul and Barnabas are back in Antioch at this point. It says, then certain individuals came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to discuss this question with the apostles and the elders. In other words, they were going to go to the denomination headquarters and find out exactly what the answer is that they needed to come up with for this church. Well, that was the right way to go about it. They went to where this teaching was coming from, and they went up there to talk about it, to figure it out, to resolve it. Often we handle things with passive-aggressive ways. You know, it becomes the elephant in the narthex, or like I said, the parking lot discussion. You see, all organizations have systems. Families, businesses, clubs, churches. And these systems don't always work the way we want them to or think they are. When problems arise, often people become anxious and fearful. This is not going my way. I'm not going to have this. It might hurt me or it might hurt my family. And a lot of that's legitimate. Some of it's not, on both sides. And so we go to the parking lot rather than going to Jerusalem, rather than sitting down and saying, okay, I'm not real sure I like this. Can we talk about why we're doing it this way? We tend to think that everything is cause and effect. We forget that all systems, all organizations, all people, families, whatever, they mutually influence each other. And so when one is upset, it upsets the whole. And I'm seeing that with my work up at the refuge in Canaan Valley. When a habitat is destroyed, through natural means, sometimes flood, then the trees can't make it, and then the deer are hurt. They have no food. This happens when we pave all of our parking lots around in our streets. Then things flood, and people get hurt on down at the end of the road, where all of the water heads to. You see, we're all mutually dependent upon each other. And it's especially important within the organization or the room. We tend to not want change, but we have to change for survival. All has to change for survival and in order for things to work right. And it's important at those change times to keep the communication going. And I say that because change is coming. How do we handle it here at Central? What are we going to do as I step back? Is our system working? Do we communicate well? Do we need to be observant, be aware, be prepared, know what buttons can get pushed? Think about how we might say things without pushing buttons. Because you see, most big upheavals are little things like fried chicken, which are stupid. But it's like the iceberg illustration. I don't know if you all have heard this, where the ship comes up and it sees the point of the ice. And everybody's aware, oh, we can't hit that iceberg. You see the ice, the fried chicken. But you're ramming the boat into the underlying part of the iceberg. And the boat sinks before anyone knows it, because we're thinking too far up. And so, Paul and Barnabas went to Jerusalem to lay it on the table, to talk about it. And so, at the beginning of the chapter again, the apostles and elders met together to consider the matter. And they debated. Paul gave his point of view. And then James listened. He was one of the elders at Jerusalem, and he offered a compromise. Well, Paul handled it well. He followed his own advice, which he wrote later in the book to the Roman church. In chapter 12, verse 18, he said, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And then in another part of Romans, he said, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Figure out how to compromise. And then we get to the end of the chapter that John read this morning. And it says, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, come, let's go back to all the churches that we preached at. What a great idea. And encourage them and talk about what they're doing and how, things are going so well. And then it says in verse 37, but Barnabas wanted to take with him John called Mark, who, by the way, was a young person. But Paul decided not to take with them one who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not accompanied them in the work. John Mark blew it. And of course we don't give him grace. We'll just kick him out. Well, the disagreement became so sharp, they parted company. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and set out, the believers commending him to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So Paul did it well, but then didn't do it well. Because you see, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. And so things will happen, and we won't do it well, and there will be some uneasiness, and things aren't going to be great. But I'm telling you, God is in this place, and it will be good. And I love, and of course, we are not going to split, but I love this. Another pastor said, and I don't know who it was, said that even when church conflict does become a split, and this is the grace of God, he said human divisions become divine multiplication. Because normally the two churches go on and they do well. You see, because God is in this place, it will go well. But we do have to take our part to be aware that it doesn't get to a bad place. Amen? I still say, when I get to heaven, I'm talking to Paul.